Qué bueno que desde muchos de ustedes, particularmente los académicos que estamos en los edificios de IE, nos hayamos venido al corazón de la universidad para hablar de sostenibilidad, que es lo que nos convoca hoy día, con la charla del profesor Ian Rowlands. Yo solamente, antes de darle la palabra al director de la carrera de Ingeniería en Energía, Daniel Olivares, comentar el por qué, y perdón Ian que lo haga en castellano, pero después puedo hacer la traducción, no sé cómo estará el castellano, de por qué es tan fundamental tener la oportunidad de escuchar académicos, miradas internacionales y particularmente de un país tan querido en el polo opuesto del continente americano como es Canadá, en el que ha sido muy relevante en nuestra historia ambiental y sostenibilidad de Chile. Nosotros tenemos como facultad, como les decía, este lema en nuestro plan estratégico de la construcción de un mundo más inteligente y sostenible. Más inteligente, algo que hemos liderado hace muchos años, la ciencia de datos. Fuimos la primera universidad en Chile que tuvo un magíster en ciencia de datos, magíster en inteligencia artificial, doctorado en ciencia de datos, y obviamente eso permea nuestra vida cotidiana de manera absoluta. Pero nada de eso es posible de hacer si es que no lo hacemos al mismo tiempo también en cómo hacemos, y yo siempre lo sintetizo así, que lo que hagamos hoy sea una contribución para un mundo mejor. Cómo como facultad y como universidad existimos para que el mundo del bienestar del hoy y del mañana de la sociedad sea un mayor bienestar. Y cómo, obviamente, la ciencia y la tecnología aportan a ese mayor bienestar de la sociedad, entendiéndolo además en un contexto integral que como Universidad Adolfo Ibáñez tenemos a través de nuestra formación en artes liberales. Y por eso esto y esta charla de hoy es central no solamente para el grupo de energía, no solamente para el grupo, los que vemos temas de agua en general, sino que precisamente por la mirada más integradora de Ian, que además me dio mucha envidia, pertenece a una escuela de recursos naturales y medio ambiente y sostenibilidad, que no es que fuera nueva y una moda, no es que tuviera 5 o 10 años, sino que tiene más de 50 años, lo cual es notable y que nos muestra cómo Canadá ha sido líder en esto. Y solo para demostrar cómo ha sido esto tan influyente, gracias al acuerdo de libre comercio que tuvimos con Canadá en la década del 90, cuando la gran mayoría de ustedes no habían nacido todavía, es que Chile tiene hoy el país con mejor agua potable de toda América, mejor que Estados Unidos, porque precisamente, antiguamente, nuestras ciudades, esto es un ejemplo, no tenían planta de tratamiento de agua servida. Y el Tratado de Libre Comercio con Canadá y la asistencia técnica de Canadá nos obligó como país a subir el estándar y hacer que todas nuestras plantas de tratamiento de aguas servidas, todas nuestras ciudades, perdón, que tenían agua potable, trataran las aguas y volvieran a los ríos y la agricultura de antaño, que se regaba con agua que salía de las ciudades, se pudiera regar con aguas limpias, y eso mejoró obviamente la salud y fue un impacto en bienestar. Siempre a mí cuando preguntan cuál es, por ejemplo, el mayor invento de la humanidad en términos de salud, no son las vacunas, es el agua potable. Y eso fue un ejemplo de cómo Canadá y la mirada de sostenibilidad impactó en nuestro país. Así que sin más, muchas gracias. Thank you very much, Ian, for being here. It's been a pleasure to have you here. I'm very looking forward to what you will be telling us. Y dejo a Daniel Olivares, director de la carrera de Ingeniería y Energía, con ustedes para que nos cuente un poco más detalles que venimos a escuchar. Así que muchas gracias por estar acá.
Siempre me queda el micrófono en la frente después de que habla Claudio. Bueno, muchas gracias a todos por responder a la invitación. Me gustaría partir con una reflexión y luego contarles un poquito del propósito de este ciclo de charlas. No hay un solo camino que nos haya traído hasta aquí. Lo que llamamos historia es una trama de voces, una red de creencias tejidas en el tiempo. Bueno, muchas gracias. El mundo que habitamos no es destino, sino interpretación. Me gustaría y si el pasado es relato, entonces el presente es decisión y el futuro posibilidad. Quizás el mayor acto de sostenibilidad sea volver a escuchar, reaprender a narrar y atreverse a imaginar de otro modo lo que significa habitar la Tierra. Ya, salgo de la solemnidad de las palabras iniciales, pero es con este espíritu con el que damos inicio al ciclo de diálogos transdisciplinarios sobre sostenibilidad de la Universidad Adolfo Ibáñez. Este es un espacio pensado para abrir conversaciones que crucen disciplinas, saberes y escalas, desde lo local a lo global, desde lo técnico a lo político, desde lo institucional a lo cultural, todo en torno a los desafíos y posibilidades que enfrentamos como humanidad. La complejidad de los desafíos que enfrentamos en torno a la sostenibilidad planetaria nos exige ir más allá de soluciones técnicas o disciplinares. Nos exige repensar nuestras formas de habitar, de comprender el mundo y de relacionarnos con la Tierra y con nosotros mismos. Esta serie de diálogos transdisciplinarios sobre sostenibilidad nace desde la convicción de que los grandes cambios comienzan por la manera en la que conversamos, por los marcos de creencias que compartimos y por las historias que nos contamos sobre el pasado, el presente y el futuro. Abrimos entonces este ciclo como una invitación a explorar nuevas formas de ver, de pensar y de actuar, a través del encuentro de saberes diversos, disciplinas distintas y voces que desde su diferencia pueden ayudar a imaginar y construir un futuro más justo, sostenible y consciente. Por favor, muchachos, tomen esta oportunidad de fortalecer su formación y transformarse en agentes de cambio con perspectiva y propósito. Este ciclo de charlas es un esfuerzo conjunto entre el Programa de Ingeniería Civil en Energía, el Magíster en Tecnologías de Gestión de Energías Renovables y el Centro de Transición Energética Centra de la Universidad Adolfo Ibáñez. Además, agradecemos el apoyo que hemos recibido de la Dirección de Investigación Institucional para organizar este ciclo de charlas. Nuestro propósito es generar una reflexión a lo largo de todo el año acerca de los orígenes, alcances y posibles soluciones a la mega crisis de sostenibilidad planetaria. Nos honra inaugurar este ciclo con la charla del profesor Ian Rowlands, académico de la School of Environment, Resources and Sustainability de la Universidad de Waterloo, en Canadá, y referente internacional en temas de transición energética y gobernanza climática. En su presentación titulada lo tengo en inglés acá, Taking a Systems Approach to Energy Transitions, Canadian and Global Examples, nos invitará a pensar la transición energética desde una mirada sistémica, abordando temas críticos como la aceptación comunitaria de nuevas infraestructuras, el rol emergente y discutido del hidrógeno verde y las tensiones entre los objetivos climáticos y los intereses nacionales en tiempos de creciente inestabilidad geopolítica. Por favor, tomen nota de que hay un QR adelante para que registren su asistencia y también puedan escribir preguntas, idealmente en inglés, pero también pueden escribirlas en español y nosotros las podemos traducir cuando las presentemos a Ian. Y sin agregar nada más, démosle por favor la bienvenida con un aplauso a nuestro speaker, Ian Rowlands.
Good morning, everyone. First of all, thank you very much for the opportunity to present today. I'm delighted and honored to be here as you've got your seminar series kicking off. And thank you to you here in the audience in the auditorium, and thank you to you online for joining today as well. I've been greeted with such warm and generous hospitality over the past few days. I'm so delighted and excited by what the conversation today might yield and the conversation going forward as well. So let's see if I have some slides coming up. Maybe I start. There we go. Excellent. That's me. And as was mentioned, the bit of the introductory comments I understood, the title of my presentation, Taking a Systems Approach to Energy Transitions, Canadian and Global Examples. And the purpose that I have for the presentation today is to investigate some of the opportunities and challenges associated with an energy transition. And I recognize the audience has different perspectives, different needs, so on and so forth. A number of you are students, I understand, which is fantastic, and thinking about your own professional development. A number of you are colleagues, be that from university, be that from industry, be that from community, and maybe you're interested in some collaborative work at in some way, or at a minimum, perhaps some of my comments can be thought-provoking for what you're doing. Nevertheless, I'll present a wide range of issues over the coming 30 or 35 minutes, and I'd be happy to come back on any of them in the Q&A that follows. So my talk is divided into 5 parts. I'll start with a bit of context setting. I'll then go on and present 3 brief vignettes of different ways in which I'm seeing the energy transition happening and parts of it in which I'm interested in. I'm interested in local acceptance issues. I'm interested in international issues, and the green hydrogen element has me curious. And I come from Canada, and if you've read the news at all, it's not a happy time in Canada. And that's not just because it's winter and I left snow on the ground, but because we are in an economic battle, economic war with our traditional allies to the south, the United States. So I'll talk a little bit about national ambitions and thinking about the energy transition. And then a brief summary will conclude. And again, I chose these three topics because my emerging understanding of Chile is that there might be some interesting comparatives going on there. So this might be helpful for your work, or you might have ideas that will be helpful for my work as well. So let me start by setting some of the foundations. So I've got 4 building blocks there, if you will, and perhaps well known to this audience. I'll start a little bit with energy and sustainability. Energy is central and critical to life. The lights, the projector, the embedded energy in the wood, the concrete, the steel in the building, so on and so forth. And it has generated a range of benefits for societies across many centuries, most definitely. And I think it's indisputable that our prosperity, our thriving, is contingent upon a secure and safe supply of energy and sustainable supply of energy. And that's where we get to the challenge, that our present pattern of energy use is not sustainable today. In particular, because 80% of it continues to be provided by fossil fuels. And there's a range of sustainability challenges associated with our energy systems today. But for me, one that stands out above all is the global climate change challenge. So these fossil fuels are contributing to the increased concentration of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, which in turn is raising global average temperatures. And we've seen that we're already 1.5 degrees centigrade above pre-industrial periods, and we're already at the edge of what the Paris Accord a number of years ago was saying the outer boundary of what is, quote, acceptable. So we need an energy transition. We need greenhouse gas emissions to fall dramatically, of the order of tens of percent this decade, and a net zero target by 2050. So we need to transition to something unequivocally. We need to change, we need to move from our present system of energy supply to something else. So that brings me to the second box in my foundation, and energy transitions. And thinking about the one we need now, good news is we've had energy transitions in the past. And in the 1800s, for instance, we had an energy transition from biomass to coal. At the beginning of the 1800s, coal was responsible for something like 2% of global energy supply, and by the end, 50% of global energy supply. The steam engine, new ways of manufacturing, new industrial organization catalyzed that increased use. And then last century, we had another transition. We had increased use of oil. The use of contribution of oil to global energy supply in 1900 was 2%. By 1950, it was 35%. Transportation, of course, motivating a lot of that change necessarily. So when I was starting my professional career, you see the gray beard here. So I was an engineering student 40 years ago in the 1980s. There was talk about energy transitions then as well. So the 1980s, we were coming out of the 1970s, which had major oil crises. So the supply of oil was curtailed in an unprecedented way. You had lineups at gas stations, you had 3-day work weeks, you had all sorts of restrictions on traditional energy use. So 1980s, as I'm doing engineering, I had a summer job at Chevron Canada looking for oil. We were thinking about a transition. Issues on my mind at that time were, this is a picture that depicts from the early 1980s, the within Canada discussions about resource use and resource wealth, whether the Western petro-rich part of the country should help the eastern part of the country or not. Discussions about how you manage national resources. Imagining the future in different ways as well. I pulled out this graph from 1979. The UK was projecting how might energy supply continue into the future. If you look at the big wedges which go to 2025, and that's today, you'll see that, that nuclear and coal will be powering the United Kingdom. I'll save you the Googling. Nuclear and coal do not presently power the United Kingdom. But nevertheless, when we were sitting in the 1980s thinking about futures, those were the kinds of things we were thinking about. Did this get resolved? Did the Canadian issues get resolved? Actually, no. They simply continued for those 40 years. And the use of resource wealth continues to be an issue. And did that come true? I already told you, no, it didn't come true. Does that mean we shouldn't bother projecting or thinking about the future? Not at all. I'd say it's very important to think about the future because you can learn, you can reflect upon what your options are, and you can chart a variety of paths forward. Well, in the 40 years since I sat where you were sitting, and I gather this building wasn't here 40 years ago, so I'm meeting at the University of Toronto as an engineering student, the energy landscape has changed in ways we haven't anticipated. So as far as I can remember, no one said the word fracking. They might have said other words that sounded like it, but no one said fracking in the 1980s in my class. This was a new technology to get secondary oil and natural gas out of depleted wells, and used a lot in the United States. And the implication was on the right. The United States was a net importer of natural gas, but then boom, met all of its needs and became a net exporter. No one projected that. A second one was the price of solar panels. Yes, we understood the notion of learning, but if we had thought the price would fall from $17 to 31 cents, that's a dramatic fall over that period. Again, some of that may be projected, but not to that degree. And then the third one was the rise of China over the past 40 years could not necessarily have been projected. China had something of the order of 2.5% of the world GDP in 1985, and currently close to 17% of world GDP. And if I combine my last two slides as well, would I have known that China would dominate the global market for EVs, batteries, and solar panels? Not necessarily. So what does this teach us, I think? I think it teaches us we have to be prepared for the unexpected, not necessarily know what's going to come forward, and have change. Change should be the norm that you see. So you're now sitting there, we're all sitting here in 2025, and perhaps we can cast our eyes 40 years forward. And fortunately, this will not be on the test, by the way. There's much too busy a diagram I see. The Shell Group, which is a world leader in thinking about scenarios, has thought about what the world might look like in 2065. So the 40 years ahead at this point. And you'll see that if you look at the detail at some point, there's lots of differences in the energy mix. There is some, for instance, hydrogen and solar and wind and fossil fuels and all of them, but to different extents. So things are going to change, but we don't necessarily know the direction and the order, pace of change as well. Think broadly, think outside of the box, be resilient, and expect the unexpected are some of the messages I think comes from this. Let me go on and pick up on energy systems. And I've got a diagram here that this kind of diagram I use with my students simply as a reminder to them that when we talk about energy, we're talking about a chain in some ways. I sometimes say to my students, you might have heard on the news, the price of oil is X dollars per barrel. But no one, at least not in my community, wants to have a barrel of oil in their living room at their home. They're interested in the results of this chain of activity and the energy service that comes out. So There's a source at the left, and there are energy services at the far right. And I already 5 minutes ago flagged the lighting, the embedded energy in the furniture, so on and so forth, as some of those services that we've been getting. So the importance of thinking of energy in a system-wide context, I think, is critical. You can think of it in terms of this chain. You can think of it in terms of a spatial distribution reaching broad. So energy, you'll see a slide or two. Canada and Chile send energy abroad, receive energy from abroad. You can think of it in terms of time as well. So that barrel of oil I talked about is here because of biological processes over thousands of years. That nuclear power station that's in my home province is creating waste that will have implications for society for centuries going forward. So there's that spatial context, there's that time context as well. So the importance, I would say, and many say it as well, of thinking about energy in a systems way. Last of the foundation, Canada and Chile. That one's Canada, you all know that and everything. So that's where I come from. And I come from a university called the University of Waterloo, one of Canada's leading universities in southern Ontario. We're a community of about 40,000 people. Known for a number of areas, especially our energy work. And you've got a logo in the lower right there of our Institute for Sustainable Energy. Lots of colleagues who are working on a whole range of energy issues. That one is, yes, Chile. So interested in the connections between the two countries as well. I knew a little bit about it, but preparing and conversations during this trip, there's a rich web of connections between our two countries. We are members of a number of intergovernmental organizations together, and we also have a free trade agreement with associated environmental and labor agreements that have been signed and acted upon for more than 25 years. And Canada is one of the leading investors in your economy as well. And I've learned as well parts of the energy system too. So for me, there's that fantastic foundation of connections between our two countries. Just a bit briefer about our two countries. So this is a little bit about Canada's primary energy supply. So like many countries, and you'll see Chile in a second, we've got a diversity of portfolios supplying us. And in particular, what might stand out is our natural gas. In Chile, you know this well, you've got a diversity of portfolio of supply powering your economy as well across the range of fossil fuel and other resources. Our energy economy is a fair bit larger than yours, but our population is larger than yours as well. We're a country with about a bit more than twice as many people as Chile. A couple of just facts about comparing the two countries. In terms of per capita consumption, Canada's consumption is about 4 times larger. In terms of exporting and importing, Canada is a major energy exporter, and Chile relies upon other parts of the world for some of its energy supply. Interestingly, and I think a function of geography and other things, not every country has transportation and industry as their 2 largest demand sectors. We do. You've got this long geography, we've got a long and wide geography, so transportation is so critical to social thriving. And industry as well. Your mining sector and other large contributions to industry activity. We've got a large oil and gas sector and large contributions to industry activity as well. Both of us have a relatively fossil-free electricity generation system, though we both still have some fossil elements in it. And solar generation in Chile is about 2 to 1 over Canada. And as a share of the contribution, it's even many-fold more than that 2 to 1. Per capita energy-related CO2 emissions are about 3 to 1. Canada is a larger emitter than Chile. This is the last of the contextual slides, and this is sort of mainly for my academic and research colleagues in the crowd. Just that I see there's a lot of potential benefit for collaboration in research and engagement across academic areas. So on the left are just a few bullet points of the kinds of benefits that could accrue. I would be happy to pick up on conversations at all. On the right are some of the funding agencies that support international engagement as well. But let me go on to the second part of what I wanted to talk about, and three short, or the first one's a bit longer, than two short vignettes of things going on in the energy transition where I think there's some parts of work I'm doing and may have some resonance with you. And the first one is this notion about local acceptance of energy infrastructure projects. And I'll put out there a proposition that many seem to accept, that if a new project is going to go forward in a community, the community needs to accept it, maybe even embrace it or wholeheartedly endorse it. But there needs to be some sort of engagement and acceptance. And if there isn't, there can be opposition, which can serve to derail a project and can serve to leave a sour feeling, bitter feelings for any future work that might be done as well. So this kind of acceptance work takes place at different levels. And you can think about the acceptance at a national level for the direction of your energy policy, perhaps. In Canada, we have debates about what resources should be used, how should they be used. But it can take place at a local level as well. And that's what I'm going to focus on, thinking about the ways in which projects can or cannot be accepted at the local level. I don't know, I'm learning about Chile and I'm delighted I am, and Googling can be a dangerous thing, but it seems to be these sorts of issues are alive here as well, as there's discussions about projects, energy expansion projects, and the ways in which communities may be accepting them or not. But let me return to that which I know more, much more, and that's Canada. And in particular, my home province of Ontario, which in Canada, the provinces are leaders in how energy is managed. And I'll just set a little bit of context by saying, first of all, after years of flat electricity demand, it's expected there's going to be much more increase for electricity demand. On the right, you'll see that driving this is, for instance, electric vehicles, anticipated to be increased uptake, and data centers and artificial intelligence. I'll add as well to that headline, home heating and the movement from natural gas to heat pumps will be a major driver as well. And it's expected that we almost need to double our generation capacity and energy production within 25 years. And that's after the previous 25 years being flat demand. So the province has launched its largest procurement program ever. It has said, we need power supply. And they've said they're agnostic as to what it could be. Small modular nuclear? Sure. Natural gas? Sure. Battery storage to help with renewables and others? Sure. Renewables, so on and so forth. Just give it to us, that is most cost effective, is their argument. So a number of us are saying this is really an opportunity to think about the ways in which the electricity and energy landscape in our province is going to be built for at least a generation or two to come. Because not only are you building new, you're having to replace the old that is getting tired and out of service. So, an opportunity to think about the electric future that we want. So I'm intrigued as there have been this procurement or purchasing activity going on, some communities have embraced the opportunity. And this is our Minister of Energy announcing the agreement to create a new battery storage facility in one part of Ontario late last year. There's a smile, almost a smile on his face, and everyone's thinking about the good times coming ahead. By contrast, just not too much different, another community in Ontario said no to battery storage. And on the left is the woman who organized the resistance or opposition to the battery storage project in her community. And the upper right is a quotation from one of the municipal politicians, which was indicative of the debate that went on within that community. I have no respect for how the proponent wanted to put us in a pressure point of having a deadline. I like to make evidence-based decisions, said the councillor. The bottom right was the perspective of the proponent, the person who wanted to bring in the battery storage facility, and said, considering the incorrect information that's being spread throughout the community and the fact that community members who supported the project were afraid to come forward, we decided to put the project on hold. So you've got the same technology, the same province, and very different outcomes with regard to acceptance or not, all within the past year and a half. And sitting in a university, that says, that's a dilemma worth research, I think, in that you've got proponents who are advancing sustainable energy projects, and you've got different results. Some communities accepting, and some communities rejecting. So I'm curious about what might be the drivers for this. And the literature instinctively says one first place to look is at issues of distributive justice and procedural justice. So with distributive justice, this is the way in which the benefits and costs of change are managed or handled by any community. So if someone's going to bring in a battery storage facility, things are going to change. Steel will have to be put in the ground, roads will have to be built, money will be generated as well as electricity stored, so on and so forth. How are those benefits and costs divided? Proponents are keen to say, we've got this in mind, and we're going to bring you jobs, we're going to bring you business growth, and we're going to strengthen the local infrastructure as well. So there's lots of good stuff that can be had with our new project. And we're going to strike a community benefits agreement with your local mayor as well. But for other communities only see the bad. They may see losing our agricultural land. They may see that there's no particular benefits that are coming to them, but instead there's health and safety implications that are borne on them. The company that builds the wind turbine, in this case, they were refused. Their leaders sit in Toronto and Germany and not in rural Ontario. So the distribution of the benefits and the costs have implications, as does the procedural justice and the way in which engagement happens. And generally, it's accepted that open and frank conversation early in the project is important. So the gold standard of what developers and proponents are trying to do is to have engagement processes, open houses, transparency with regard to what they want to do. But critics say not every developer does that. And another project from Ontario is a councillor said, consultations were either too late or woefully inadequate, pointing to one project that held an open house 44 kilometers away from the proposed site in the middle of a weekday. If these applicants had come to the table 6 months ago, engaged with my office earlier, engaged with the public earlier, then maybe we'd be having a different conversation today. So the way in which the process unfolds might be an important driver of that outcome as well. So with regard to where this is at for me, well, I'm intrigued that this is a living experiment going on in Ontario right now. And so gratified that I've got a team of students looking at the projects that have been accepted and rejected across our province over the past year and a half. I'd love to dig deep on some more of them. see the impact, tell the story about the distributive justice elements, the procedural justice element. I'm interested in policy entrepreneurs. I'm interested in veto coalitions. I'm interested in networks and structure and so on. And it'd be also interesting to look at the ways in which this pattern might hold, this distribution of subjects might have some patterns in it. Where are all the rejected projects? Where are all the ones that are in limbo now? So on and so forth. Whether that's helpful for you thinking about if you have interest here in Chile about whether particular projects are going forward or not, I'd be curious about cross comparisons. Let me go on to my last two and do them more quickly. And the first one is about international elements, and I use green hydrogen as an example. And I'm interested, my first example was local. This one is the international, because energy transition will have international dimensions and will continue to have international dimensions. The international can provide larger markets for positive technological development. The international can provide cross comparisons and cross learning in terms of standard setting or policy development, so on and so forth. And in terms of something like your energy system broadly, it's becoming clear that the international may comment on your local activities. The Europeans are scheduled to bring in their carbon border adjustment mechanism in 2026, which means that they will reflect upon the goods that are coming in to see whether the carbon input to them has been appropriately taxed in a means that is similar to what they do in Europe. So all of a sudden, if that steel that is imported into Europe was made with fossil energy or renewable energy, has consequences for market share. So hydrogen is feeding into this conversation, and hydrogen is part of a broader conversation in energy portfolio, climate change portfolio more broadly too. I think it's lost a bit of its luster over the past 10 or 20 years, but I see people still talking about if we need a net zero achievement by 2050, it may play a role for heavy transportation and for long duration storage in particular. So there's talk about the ways in which green hydrogen internationally might be part of a sustainable energy system in the future. Again, my one slide from my host country here, there are conversations I understand going on in Chile about the ways in which your vast renewable energy resources might be deployed to develop your own international market for green hydrogen, and conversations with colleagues around the world as well. Coming back to Canada, we have a hydrogen strategy, and internationalization of our green hydrogen is part of that strategy. We think, and I think we share characteristics with Chile on this, we think we're well positioned to be a player in this space. We've got some good renewable energy resources. We've got good rule of law and technical standards. We've got good international relations and a history of engaging in international trade as well. So we've tried to take this forward with Germany. And to much excitement in 2022, our former Prime Minister hosted the former German Chancellor in Newfoundland, and they stood by the wind turbines there and signed an agreement for green hydrogen, thinking about using the renewable energy on our east coast to then provide green hydrogen to a Germany that was dealing with an energy crisis in the wake of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. 3 years later, we haven't gotten as far as we'd like to. Things have stalled and the targets for 2024, 2025 haven't been reached. The costs are still high. I saw one commentator call it a chicken and egg situation. We're not going to produce the hydrogen until the infrastructure is there. We're not going to build the infrastructure until the hydrogen is available to move. So the way in which you need to bring together those diffuse benefits. I'm intrigued as I look forward, I'm intrigued by this green hydrogen chain And I'm intrigued by, does it make sense for Canada to engage with Germany? We're talking about Asia a lot as well. Does it make sense from our West Coast? Does it make sense to be part of a resilient system within Canada? What's the transport that's most effective? Should it be by ships? Should it be by pipeline? Our natural gas people are talking about interspersing hydrogen with natural gas. So it's very much in the formative stages, and I see intriguing issues there going forward. My last of my three is about national ambitions and energy foundations. And in some ways, I circle back to the start of my talk when I talked about energy being central to life. Well, energy is also central to national well-being. If countries have particular responsibilities for safety and security, I think energy provision is certainly part of that. And we're reflecting on it in Canada a lot right now for reasons I've hinted at, and I'll tell you briefly more about it in a second. But my starting positions are that what I grew up in, even back in the 1980s, the post-World War II order, global world order, is disintegrating. And something more akin to a 19th century balance of great powers with geographical spheres of influence is growing. And countries are reflecting upon their own core values, societal goals, and national strategies in fundamental ways. I think it's almost like there was a time in the pandemic where a lot of, you may recall the phrase, build back better. There was a sense that we have a clean slate in front of us, that we can put virtually everything on the table. And maybe we're at that moment now as well. And like other countries, Chile, I know, has conversations about how they want to proceed with their national energy system as well. But coming back to Canada, I'll just say yeah, he posted that on the social media he created. So after Prime Minister Trudeau went down to Florida to try and engage in rational diplomacy, and soon realized you don't do that with this president, the president brought out this meme about Canada becoming the 51st state. And in Canada, first we thought it was sort of a joke, and ha ha ha, how funny and everything. But it's now become, it's real. It's very real. Our former Prime Minister, we just changed leaders, Prime Ministers, a couple of weeks ago. Prime Minister Trudeau said publicly the plan of the US is to annex Canada, to make Canada part of the United States. So that's what we're dealing with in Canada right now. And energy is a key part of the conversation as we reflect upon what we do. We are tied into the US so much in so many ways, with energy being one of them. This is a, 13-year-old slide, but I thought the headline was what used to be the norm. Integrated electric grid improves reliability for both countries, for the United States and Canada. And you could say the same about the fossil fuel network. You could say the same about a variety of ways we're connected. Energy is critical to our economy. So akin to mining being so important to your economy, energy is so important to our economy. It's such an important generator of economic wealth for us. It's critical to our identity as well. When our founding peoples, the British, the French, and the Indigenous, very much a resource-based economy and society, and using resources for livelihoods. And as I talked about 10 or 15 minutes ago, this is the leader of Alberta, which is the petroleum province, and it continues to be a very important part of our political processes too. So I'm seeing a moment occurring in Canada where we're buying Canadian, we are not engaging with the US to the extent that we did, and we're considering our new way forward. And conversations are going on with that blank slate and thinking about new energy futures internally and externally as well. We have a national election going on. The election will be just over 1 month from now, and energy will be part of the nation-building conversation that I hope is central to the discussions there too. So for me, thinking about this going forward, I'm thinking about my own research and the ways in which it's an important part of nation building and thriving. And not nation building in a nativist, xenophobic way, about engaging multilaterally with like-minded countries who value freedom, value collective benefits, and other sorts of Canadian values. We used to have a carbon tax, and it was one of the world's most impactful carbon taxes. And we lost it because I think our society was not energy literate enough. So I think energy literacy and understanding the connections between climate and energy will be critical going forward. So I just put that up there in the upper right. In the bottom left, I'm a member of a local board of directors for a community that's trying to think forward about how can we in Waterloo region, a community of 600,000 people, contribute to global and national prosperity through an energy transition. So we're trying to be leaders by bringing in municipal standards for buildings, and we're trying to think about a thermal grid, which is common in parts of Europe, I understand, but not particularly common in Canada. So there might be conversations going on here as well. Last slide. What I tried to do was to give you a bit of sense of some aspects of the global energy transitions that might have some salience for some of your interests in some ways. And tried to do that by giving you a bit of context, talking a bit about local acceptance, and in particular, the projects that are emerging in Ontario. I went to the international and used green hydrogen as a bit of a thought starter, and then looked at the national as well, and looked for, just had a bit of a therapy session in front of you as I talked about the pain Canada is going through right now as we reflect upon our future. As I say, therapy session and pain, I think we're beyond the denial phase. So we have a saying in Canada that has caught on well. It's to do with ice hockey, so it may not come naturally to any of you. The saying is elbows up, because when you go into the corner for the puck, you want to get your elbows up so you don't get hit unexpectedly. So we've got our elbows up, and yeah. Third bullet there, the critical value of an engineering education. For the students in the crowd doing a first degree in engineering, I was there 40 years ago and provided me such a fantastic foundation. Went on and did other kinds of things, but always rely upon the fantastic knowledge and ways of thinking I learned then. And I'd say use your engineering education in thinking about systems. I'd say collaborate with others, work at boundaries. It can be really exciting. And I say Canada and Chile have much to learn from each other. I've learned much over the past few days and even before that, to which I'm so grateful to my colleagues and look forward to continue to learn. And if any of you online or in the audience want to pick up on any themes of common interest, I'd be delighted to. Thanks very much for your time. Perfect.
Okay, thank you so much, Ian. This was a wonderful presentation, so full of details. And we open the floor for questions now. So I guess our students might be asking or wondering whether the whole problem of energy wasn't just solving for voltages and currents then.
That's right, yes.
We have a question here, yeah. Just a second.
No? Yes. Thank you for a wonderful presentation. Lots of information. So, two comments. One is for the last issue that you were commenting, how Chile and Canada can come together, thinking where is this new world going to and how do we participate in it. I think that type of reflection we were talking here with the Dean is not very common in Chile today. We are looking at very irrelevant, in my opinion, issues and concerns, and every time we have an election that turns to happen. And so, but this is a key point. I mean, where is the world going? Where is the new world? What is the new world order going to be? And what role are we going to play, being a small country like you?
Yes.
And where China is a very important business partner for us. But then again, there's this Trumpian notion that maybe we shouldn't be working. Well, anyway, I think there's a very important line of work with Canada. I used to be in the, this is part of the story, when the Chile-Canada agreement was signed, so I'm older than you, I was part of the committee, Chile-Canada committee, that we traveled once a year, go back and forth, figuring out what it is we should be doing. And none of this came up, of course. But there is a consensus that Chile and Canada have very similar issues and concerns, and we have to work on them together. So I think that's important. But I wanted to ask a very specific question relating to the local, your local part. You sort of presented two localities and said, okay, there are differences due to distributive concerns and due to distributive justice and procedural justice. But that sort of begs the question, right? Because it would seem that there is a right answer, which there isn't. The two different communities can perfectly well, one say, I want it, and the other say, I don't want it, due to those two reasons, but then again, due to power relations, to history, to lots of other factors. So I was wondering, and so that's a different world. There's not a one-size-fits-all. Yeah. And that goes to the issue of property rights. What does a property right for a firm, or for anybody wanting to develop a project, give you a right to do? Right? I want your
fantastic questions, and I'd love to continue the conversation. On the second one first, point well taken about context is so important in the outcomes of these individual projects. As I, with broad brush strokes, point to the distributive and procedural elements to get us thinking about it, there can then be very important details within those. I mean, elements that are important as well include, as you've hinted at already, the nature of the community. Is it a high-income summer cottage community, or is it a rural, agricultural, lower middle-class community? That affects the dynamics. What is the history involved as well? Has one community already had a poor experience with some sort of international vendor coming in or not? And there can be a range of other things that are going on, most definitely. So I take those points, and very important to look at details, to look at context in particular, though I don't think you're disagreeing. I would say frameworks can still help you, guide you in thinking about the initial questions that are there. But I'm intrigued by the richness of you raised a couple of good hypotheses and areas to look at. Ownership of the vendor coming in, and so on and so forth. There's lots of different elements that are fascinating. And then on the first one, I thank you for your service in nurturing the connections between the two countries. And note, the two countries have much to learn from each other, and picking up on your point, thinking about how we deal with this new world order as well. I mean, we are caught between China and the US as well in different, I accept, in very different kinds of ways. But 3 months ago, I think it would have been a given that we would have followed the US's tariff structure on Chinese EVs, solar panels, and batteries. And we did. Whereas now, those sorts of things are up for grabs. I'm not saying that we are going to become China's allies, but we've got that blank slate in front of us. And maybe Chile is also reflecting upon its options as well, and that comparison and reflection upon what questions are you asking yourself, what sort of data are you getting, how are you thinking about resiliency in your international relations going forward, I think would prove fruitful, and I hope our two respective countries are doing those sorts of things. And one thing I'll just add is that I think the local comparisons can be valuable as well. So even though, designing a market so that it is equally, it leaves no one behind, an electricity market, so it ensures that your largest mining company gets fair rates, but it ensures that the lowest decile of your population gets fair rates as well. Those are questions that we're facing as well, thinking about how do we leave no one behind in advancing a efficient and sustainable electricity market. So that would not be connecting the two countries, but comparing the experiences. So thank you for your question.
Thank Thank you, Ian. We have a question from our dean, Claudio.
Thank you, Ian. I mean, while you were presenting, was thinking this is a whole course. I mean, you just presented a whole or a couple of courses in a single fantastic presentation. And thank you also for bringing in these comparisons, very interesting. I have two questions. The first one, I'm not only dean here, but I also serve on the board of the World Energy Council, which is an NGO based in UK, representing Latin America and the Caribbean. And one of the mottos of World Energy Council has been trying to be the voice of reason in the energy discussion. But the energy discussion in general is in many places very highly, both on the ideological side or interest, private interest, usually very non-reasonable. And many of the examples you bring in is because sometimes it's fears, sometimes it's ignorance. I always say ignorance is the most abundant renewable resource of humanity. What is, in your perspective, who can be a trustable voice of reason in this global and local debate? And the second question is, our Chilean case is very famous in terms of energy transition, but the main driver of it is not policy, it's been market. Proper design of markets, proper design of energy bids, that long-term bids that brought in a lot of competition, and it has been technology, costs, global costs, open markets, and the market forces that have been pushing this energy transition. So my question is, even though the whole turmoil in the world isn't finally the market force going to push forward an energy transition based on EVs? I don't trust much in green hydrogen, don't blame me on this, but I see it as a niche, a huge niche, but it's only a niche. I don't see transport, road transport or in green hydrogen. I don't see it in heating, I don't see it in anywhere except for a niche. So market forces are going to drive the energy transition. What's your view? Of course, it needs proper markets.
Yeah.
It needs proper adjustment on the markets, but it's going to be markets that drive, and it's going to be China overall through market forces. It's the most capitalistic country in the world. So those two questions. Is the energy transition basically at the end, the market's going to push it, and who should be the voice of reason in this turmoil?
And I might need a third course to answer those great questions as well. So thank you very much for them. I'll just offer a couple of quick reactions, and always happy to follow up on the elaboration. So the markets idea, point very well taken. And actually the voice, the reason and the markets tied together in some ways, and reflecting upon values, what is valued. And I see that in the energy discussion in Canada. It had become polarized in ways that so much of our conversation in society has become polarized, at least in Canada. And that if you were to mention carbon capture, if you were to mention nuclear power, if you were to mention oil, if you were so on, and you could flip and sort of say, if you were to mention wind turbines, so on and so forth, you would be automatically pigeonholed into something, and there would not be reason. There would not be reasonable debate there. And even though there could be outcomes and scenarios that are worth exploring, in light of different values that communities and societies have, we weren't getting there. I'm hoping through the work of, I'm thinking something like the World Energy Council, now is its time. Because I think the world is so chaotic now, is relatively so chaotic now, we've got that blank slate in front of us. So we're turning to the experts who can sort of say, who's got all the perspectives there? Who is convening multiple stakeholders to see that what are the possibilities going forward? And my modest understanding of the World Energy Council is inclusive with regard to its representation and so on. And is not starting as the oil lobby or the battery lobby or whatever the case may be. So I think there's opportunities there. And I think markets have to play a role. I bemoaned the loss of our carbon tax there. And I think, I recall our Premier of Saskatchewan, our second most oil-intensive province, sort of saying, we're against the carbon tax, And as soon as we find a better tool, we're going to support that better tool. And he hadn't found one. So I guess that was code for him to say, we don't really give a darn about climate change and its impacts. Who knows? But I think markets can reveal these values, can make tangible these values, and encourage multiple options at the table. First thoughts in response to a great question. Thank you.
Excellent. We have time for 2 questions. So one is from one of our students back there. Just press the button. It should be muted, but when the light is green, it's ready to go. Yeah?
I don't know much about Canadian politics, but what I understand from the presentation was that they are trying to diverge themselves from the grid of the United States and wanting to increase the baseload capacity by even thinking about thermal generation, and I don't know why no nuclear. Are there any politics that just stop it or something like that?
Yeah, great question, and your learning of Canadian politics has already been fantastic, so great question, thank you. So yes, we are thinking about disconnecting from the United States, and to come straight to your comment about nuclear power, so my home province, Ontario, generates 55% of its electricity by nuclear power. And I mentioned very briefly in passing, the procurement is proceeding with an all of the above options, and nuclear power is part of that. So we're refurbishing 3 large nuclear power plants in the province, and we have companies that are trying to develop small modular reactors. And my province, Ontario, is an interesting one because there is a social acceptance of nuclear power. And I know a country like Germany has voted against nuclear power. A country like Japan, I understand, is cautiously coming back with some nuclear power, whereas Ontario has had a steady marriage with nuclear power. And interesting to think about what has motivated that. So a great question. Nuclear power is part of that in Ontario. One other province has a little bit of it, and there has occasionally been talk in the West to have small modular reactors power some of our oil sands as well. Thank you for that question.
Thank you. Tito, please go ahead. Is it green?
Thank you so much for your wonderful talk. You mentioned a number of reasons for the conflicts with the local communities, right? One of them, of course, misinformation and fake news and so on. But you also mentioned some reasons that I saw one of the slides, for example, someone was complaining about the use of land that used for agriculture, that they were using for wind turbines, right? Yeah. So I've heard reports of similar things happening in the US as well. So do you think going forward, right, with the growth of the need, the demand for energy and so on, that this conflict of land for agriculture versus land for solar panels and wind turbines could be a deterrent for the renewable energies? What's your opinion?
Yeah, that's a great question. And in addition to the one example I had about the opposition to wind and the ways in which the opposition had as part of their debates, the access to the land would be impacted, you're spot on. We've since then had that solar panels cannot be put on the highest grade of agricultural land in our province. So the industry association has challenged that ruling by the government, saying that, and it's an area I don't know a lot about, but agro-PV and so on can be a means whereby the two services, the two important parts of our society, food and energy, can cohabitate. At this point, I think the provincial government is more beholden to the resistance groups and is trying to do as much to facilitate their perspectives as possible, so therefore brought in this ruling. I'd like to think we can have universities playing an important role as a convener of discussions about, let's bring in those values, let's bring in, again, the reasoned conversation about how do we make multiple use of lands and so on. So thank you for the question, excellent one.
Thank you.
Wonderful. This has been wonderful. Thank you so much, Ian. Let's give another applause to our guest.
Thank you very much.
And I don't want to keep you more. Thank you so much for coming. Let's just remember that this is happening every month. So next month, we're going to announce soon the next talk by a Chilean speaker this time. I hope to see you all again here. Have a nice day.